Welcome to History 601 Introduction to Public History, Week 10. And this week's topic is editing, and I'm your expert for this week. I've done a lot of editing, especially with my colleague James C. Claypool, who is a professor emeritus of history here from Northern Kentucky University. Our largest work so far was the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky, published in 2009. 1,100 pages, 300 plus authors. It was a $1 million project published by the University Press of Kentucky. It began like around 2006 or so, and we worked on it for several years until it was printed. When the requisite numbers that the press needed to kind of break even were sold, then, of course, they sold the rights to the electronic version to the Cincinnati Enquirer, that is, to the Gannett Group. And it is now featured on NKY.com. And the reason why I mention this is, if you look at the cost of the project, and that was in dollars from the first decade of the 21st century, and certainly things haven't gotten any cheaper, we had to do a lot of fundraising in order to make this book affordable, which we did. And it sold for, I think, $49.95, which, a hardback with a dust jacket and 1,100 pages was pretty phenomenal, but that was really made possible by a lot of fundraising. Probably there aren't going to be many books of this type really published in hardback form in the future. As you can see, it's already online. The book has already been put online. Probably most other kind of large reference books like this are going to have their databases. Everything is kind of switching over to databases, to e-publishing. And that could be a whole different topic, but we're just going to, in general, we're not going to be talking about so much the publishing business. We're going to be talking about the process of editing and how some of us as public historians might gravitate to this whole editing arena. The most important thing to understand, I think, when we said that the three rules of real estate were location, 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 and I think we said that the three rules really of public history are audience, 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 keeping your audience in mind. With editing, at least in history, the three rules are Chicago Manual of Style, Chicago Manual, Chicago Manual. The Chicago Manual, now in its 16th edition, is the premier source when you want to know how to do anything with publishing. So it not only deals with what you're probably more familiar with, footnotes, endnotes, bibliographies, etc., but it's going to deal with actual ways of indexing, say, books, dealing with publishers, all kinds of issues. So it is the Bible, really, of publishing in many fields, but particularly in the historical field. Now, in addition to maybe abiding by the Chicago Manual of Style, projects will often have their own house style sheet. Obviously, these will be much shorter documents than the Chicago Manual of Style. I'm looking at the 15th edition of the Chicago Manual of Style, which, by the way, is also available on as an e-document, as an e-book online. And the 15th edition has 956 pages. A house style sheet will obviously have many, many fewer pages. I am posting on the class Blackboard site an example of a house style sheet from our project we're working on now, Jim Claypool and I, the Covington Bicentennial Project. And I'll explain a little bit about that. There has never been a comprehensive history of Covington in its 200 years, and so we're going to attempt the first one. We're working with about 20 authors. I'll be writing about 1/3 of the book, which will be the introduction, which will be kind of an historical overview with a timeline and all of that. And then it'll be followed by 16, 17 chapters, which will be topical chapters. And so a house style sheet might, for example, as a house style sheet for the encyclopedia did, if you're going to constantly use something like, say, Kentucky Post or Cincinnati Post, especially if it's going to appear in footnotes a lot or in a bibliography, it makes sense to start, abbreviating things. So for Kentucky Post, we abbreviated it KP. For Cincinnati Post, CP. Those kinds of things can be contained in your own kind of house style sheet, as well as reminders to the authors of what kinds of things, the large kind of things in the Chicago Manual style to keep in their minds, because they're probably not going to have their own copy of the Chicago Manual style. And then usually you give authors that you've recruited a sample chapter or entry. You provide them with a writer's agreement, a contract, which specifies everything that's expected on their end and everything that you're going to provide on your end. Obviously, it could include a little honorarium. It might include and should include, 1, 2, 3 or more copies, complimentary copies of the book. And everything has to be, of course, very legal, because you're dealing with copyright issues. If somebody is writing for you, and you had, in the case of the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky, 300 authors, well, all of the authors and the editors, Jim and I, had to turn over copyright and sign those contracts, turning over copyright to the University Press of Kentucky, because if they ever wished to do anything with this book at any time, and let's just assume that 25, 50, 100 years from now someone might want to reprint it or whatever, they can't go around digging up, all of our descendants and finding out who owns copyright for this massive book. So contracts enable things to be put in a legal format where you can turn over copyright to one, say, organization or one publisher. They also make it easier for the authors themselves to understand what the expectations of them are. You also need to have an artwork release form, and I'm going to put an example of that from the Covington Bicentennial Project on our Class BB site. This is obviously necessary because when you deal with illustrations or photos, you need to make certain that the person who is providing you with this photo, even if you've gone ahead and scanned it, and you're not using essentially the original photo, you're using a scan, all of that has to be covered by copyright. And they have to own the copyright, whoever provides, loans the photo or whatever to you, they have to own the copyright for the photo themselves, and they have to be willing to release it again to the project, to the publisher, and you'll see what that all entails as well. And of course, a big portion of books now are, scanning photos, scanning illustrations, scanning artwork. All of that not only requires this release form, but you need to know what resolution you need to do this at. Does it need to be done at, 400 dpi, dots per inch? Does it need to be done in JPEG format? Does it need to be done in TIFF format, which is much higher resolution? A much larger file in terms of the megabytes that it's usually going to take, and checking out with the publisher in advance what those sizes are and what those formats are, that's very, very important. Trying to get everything together with the publisher is very important. Another project that I just finished in this summer of 2013 was a book originally written by Dan Hurley, which then I added a chapter over the past 25 years of Cincinnati's history for Cincinnati's 225th anniversary. Again, dealing with a publisher who happens to be in San Antonio, Texas, and trying to determine how they want the formats to be, the resolution to be. All of this is very, very important. Get it done up front. Don't be surprised. Don't have all of your, or half of your photos already scanned and they're scanned at too low of a resolution, and you're just going to make work for yourself. So it helps to know all of those things in advance. What we're mainly going to be dealing with in the early stages of editing is Microsoft Word, which really is used across the profession here across publishers, and usually turn on track changes. I'm going to show you how to do that. Now this is convenient. This is a way, if you're a teacher, that you can receive electronic essays, critiques, etc. for class. I do this all the time, not only in my online classes, but also in my face-to-face classes. If you go into Word, you'll see something like this, and on the ribbon at the top, you'll see something called Review. If you go to Review, you'll see something called Track Changes, and you want to click on that to turn it on. Track Changes will enable you to make all kinds of changes in a document, which should show up in a different color. So typically the color you choose, red. You know, redlining has always been what we've been using for corrections, for additions, etc. And the beauty of it is that you can then mark up a document, you can edit a document, and then you can save it, of course, as a different file name. You know, so if the document is Covington Bicentennial, I would put COV200 underscore CH for chapter, underscore 01 for chapter 1, underscore revision by Tenkate underscore, and then put the date like 10 underscore 20 underscore 2013. Again, the more you can keep your file names consistent and do it in such a manner that people can understand right away that they're looking at the Covington Bicentennial Project, they're looking at Chapter 1, they're looking at revisions made, and then date it. Always put a date in your file names. Then they can know which revisions they're going to have to deal with. Once they receive your revisions, they can go ahead and keep track changes on, and then they can go change by change and either hit accept, so they can go change by change, and they can say, I agree with him on this, I don't agree with him on this next change. So if they agree, they can hit accept. If they don't agree, they can hit reject. If they just trust you totally and kind of look over the document, they can have a pull-down menu here, which will mean accept all changes in the document, which is possible, etc. And now that's usually done in the first stages by an editor with his authors. And usually then we advance beyond that to some other formatting. This is an example of track changes. And usually what track changes does is, so you know that there is a change in that line, it'll put a little vertical line here out in front of the horizontal line. See the little vertical line? And so I've corrected here. Thunderstorm is not 2 words, it's 1 word. I've put cleric's thought instead of they, because it wasn't really clear what she meant here, etc. I can end up putting notes here. You need an in-text footnote here. I can end up putting punctuation in. Sometimes punctuation is more difficult to see, and hence that's where these vertical lines really come in very useful. Now once you have done that kind of editing and track changes, and your editor is probably going to get to the point where he is working or she is working with a graphic designer or a publisher. Very often these days, by the way, publishers may or may not have people in-house to do graphic design and to do editing. So besides, give you an example. Once Jim and I edited, all of the entries from the 300 plus authors for the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky, it then went to a person who was a contracting editor with the University Press of Kentucky. And she was one of the best in the business, and then she worked with us in track changes. And then when she was done with her part, it went back to the University Press, who then works with a publisher. I mean, even though the University Press of Kentucky was the publisher, they're working with a printer, they're working with a graphic design company, and they're going to go ahead and put it all together. So many times with, say, especially nonprofit presses like the University Press of Kentucky, but it's also true of the for-profit world, more and more these days they have subcontractors who work for them, maybe several different subcontractors who are editors, graphic designers, etc., and we'll take it to the next stages. In the case of the Cincinnati book, although it's being published by Cincinnati Museum Center, the real publisher is HPN Books in San Antonio, and they have on staff their own editors and do their own graphic design. With the Covington Bicentennial book, we're going to be using Black Tie Productions who's owned by Stephen Kidd in Cincinnati. He will be subcontracting out further editing after I have edited and Jim, because after we've seen it so many times, we're not going to catch mistakes. So then there'll be another line of editors that he'll subcontract with, and then when we look over all of the changes, it will finally go for some graphic design. Now, graphic designers usually know their business inside and out. And by this time, they're going to take that Word document and they're going to put it into another system totally. And all different publishers do use all different kinds of systems. So I can't even begin to tell you which system may or may not be used by a publisher. There are a lot of programs out there that allow publishers to set up the text, to set up the photographs with the captions, and, you know, to become very artistic with it. And mainly these people usually are out of, you know, an art degree, a graphic design degree. And they know this kind of computer graphic design inside and out. And they also know very often how to market things and what is going to sell and what is going to be appealing. And I put in the parentheses and also quotation marks there, letting go. It's really important for editors at one point in time to say, you know, we know what we do as editors, as professional editors, but we are not graphic designers. And we need to kind of let go of the project and to open our perspectives, our viewpoints to all kinds of things that graphic designers can come up with. Graphic designers can be very innovative, and I would say that 90% of the time, Jim Claypool and I, or whoever else is working on a project, will sit back and we'll scratch our heads and say, well, we don't know if we like that or not. Let's sleep on it. And 90% of the time, the graphic designers are right. They really are right. They really know what they're doing. And the end product is going to be something that's very appealing. There's occasionally those times where things go back and forth and the editors might say, you know, we don't really like that idea. Can you design it more like this or that? After it's all been put in its graphic design, and it's probably at this point going to be in its layout form. So you're going to see the book as it's going to appear, and usually publishers more and more these days are going to do everything once they've done the graphic design. That is, you can see the text where it's going to be, the photographs where they are going to be, the page numbers, everything laid out for you. Everybody is going to go through and edit it one more time to make certain that nothing has happened in the design phase, you know, to the text, to the photographs, that, you know, the right captions are with the right photographs, etc. And at that point in time, you're looking at proofs. More and more these days, those proofs are done electronically. And there are all kinds of programs out there that are just totally amazing that allow 5, 6, 10 people to be editing the proofs all at the same time and to all put their revisions into the proofs. And then the graphic designers will take that and incorporate those and, you know, bring out the bright, shining project. That's not always the case. So I finished off some projects. Brian Hackett and I did one for St. Elizabeth Hospital. That was done all electronically. I finished off one on Fort Mitchell, a book on Fort Mitchell. That was all done electronically. However, the publisher working out of San Antonio on the Cincinnati book is not doing electronic proofs. So we'll receive old-fashioned hard copy proofs, and we'll literally have to get in there with a red pen, and all of us will have to do our editing, and then they'll have to be mailed back. More and more publishers are not doing that, but doing something that's electronic. And at that point, things are just kind of ready, and it could take weeks or months for the actual printing to be done. More and more printing is going abroad, especially color printing, which can be very expensive, but can be done at a fraction of the cost in places like China and Korea. So all of that has to be worked in. And when you're putting together your timeline, you have to leave enough time working with the editors and publishers to get it out in a timely fashion. And usually that means oftentimes books are appearing in fall. They're appearing in September, October, November, in time for Christmas sales, because a lot of people will buy books or buy gift cards at book places like Barnes & Noble for people for Christmas, and that's when sales really are very high. Two final thoughts. If you want to ever do editing, first, before you can be a good editor, you have to be an outstanding writer. It helps to be an outstanding researcher and writer, but you have to have great writing skills, which means that you have to really be very almost pedantic about spelling and grammar, even obsessive about it, and know the rules of it, and recognize when someone has done something that's ungrammatical. And, even stylistically, it helps to know, word choice wise, did somebody choose just a poor phrase, a poor word that doesn't quite express things? Is the person too verbose? Should they tighten things up a bit? And when you're dealing with hundreds of authors, as we did, or in the case of even dozens of authors, like we will with the Covington book, it's very important to see consistency. So, very oftentimes things have to be rewritten. Somebody might be just constantly using the passive voice, and maybe they're the only author working for you that is using the passive voice, and you just have to rewrite everything they do in the active voice. You might tell them about it. They might not quite realize it. They might not give you, advance copies of their work, which is always something nice, to encourage authors to give you advance copies and to offer your help and assistance along the way. So you have to have outstanding writing skills, and you have to have lots of patience and lots of diplomacy. You need to know that fine line between telling someone, well, this needs to be rewritten and I can't rewrite it for you, because you might need to devote some more time to researching this topic, because you might be saying to them, this is a weak argument. How do you say that in a diplomatic fashion without discouraging people? Because very oftentimes these people are working for $50 or $100 or a free copy of the book, and they're putting in a lot of time, and history is their love, and they may not be professionals. Many of them may be amateurs. So it requires a lot of patience, but it certainly is something extremely it is just very satisfying and gratifying in the end. Any questions? Please feel free to email or phone me. I'm always happy to help. Have a good day.